clad in black power armor and a skull helmet. It is Lemartes, Guardian of the Lost. I'm really excited to paint this brand new model that's just been released. It's a fantastic rendition of the classic chaplain with the jump pack. So without any further ado, let's get painting. Now, to get started and to keep things a little bit easier, I left off Lemartes' helmet and his jump pack, and also the shoulder pad that's going to be the bone colour. I primed the helmet and the shoulder pad with Zandri dust. If you haven't got that spray can, don't worry, you can just paint it using the base paint. So unusually for a model, I'm painting the base first, and there's very good reason for that. If I painted the base last, I'd make a mess of all the work that I would have already done on his armour. So by doing the base first, I can make as much mess as I want and then get it all cleaned up. So to that end, I'm basing it in Karak Stone. Now this is going to take 2 or 3 coats of Karak Stone all over this black primer. Once that's completely dry, it's time to shade it. I'm going to take a little bit of Space Wolves Grey contrast paint and blob this into the middle of the base. I'm then going to dip my brush into contrast medium and use this to paint over the Space Wolves Grey. This will thin the contrast paint on the model itself and get into all those nice recesses. So I'm just going to brush this around, making sure I get it all over the base and also around the back. And I don't care if the pattern is fairly mottled. I just don't want too heavy a pooling. I then take one of my Artist Opus Series D dry brushes and start to stipple Karak Stone back over the base. Now this is where you can see it's important that we're doing the base first. And generally I'm just stippling quite roughly across the base. I'm not putting too much attention where I want this to land. Generally what you'll start to do is build up the texture on the base area. Now I'm still using the same brush for the next step. I've moved to Grey Seer, which is a nice grey colour, very light. And I'm stippling this all over the base, focusing now towards those areas that are going to catch the most light. So essentially where Lemartes isn't actually casting any shadow and catching some of those edges. The final highlight on the base is with white. Now I'm using AK white, but use whatever white you like, whether that's white Scar or Bold Titanium white. And I'm using the same brush again. So what I'm starting to get is, rather than being that pure white, it will have some of the other colours mixed into it. And I'm focusing this more towards the edges now, and a little bit of traditional dry brushing as well as stippling. And that's going to give me a really nice textured base without too much effort at all. Now, be honest, how many of you have done this? You got a fresh drink, lovely cup of tea on the desk, you go to clean your paintbrush and you pop it in your freshly made drink. Come on, I know you've done it. I do it all the time. There is a serious point to that little story, and that is that hydration is so important. Now, if you're anything like me, you're really, really busy. That's not just painting at your desk. That's doing your day job. It's looking after your family. And sometimes you can forget to drink enough water during the day. And let's face it, water can be a little bit boring anyway. Holy sent me their starter pack, which includes this shaker. And it doesn't look anything like paint water. So you can make sure that you don't actually dip your paintbrush into this, which I think on its own is a plus. But they also sent me some of their best-selling flavours. Now, we've got the hydration range, we've got iced tea, and we've got energy and focus. Now, I really love the hydration because, like I said, I sometimes struggle to drink enough. So getting some of this is really, really good. It's completely sugar-free. In fact, all of their products are sugar-free, and this is full of electrolytes as well. Now, of these, my favourite flavour is the cranberry. This tastes absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, just about half a litre of clean water, pop it in your shaker. I'm going for some hydration this afternoon. Pop a couple of ice cubes in before you give it a shake. Make sure that top is on nice and tight so that there's not going to be any spillages. And then go wild. Now that mixes really, really nicely and is going to give it an extra little bit of a chill. That's cracking. I say really, really refreshing with that extra little bit of ice in there as well. Now, if you want to try Holy, I've got a great offer for you. Use the code COACH5 and the link in the description to get £5 off your first order. Then for all your other orders, use the code COACH to get 10% off everything. That is so good. What are you waiting for? Go on, get hydrated. Now, you could probably see on the camera that Lemartes himself is quite shiny. Now, I use Chaos Black to prime it, but I want him to go with some fairly dull armour, so something a bit more matte. So to that end, I'm taking some AK Black, which is a very matte black, and I'm going to thin this with some water, and I'm going to paint it all over the black elements. So I'm taking my time with this, particularly around the base, because I don't want to make any mistakes, and don't forget to do the jump pack as well. Don't worry too much about those shoulder trims just yet, because we are going to do a bit more work on those pads before we need to worry about it. The first bit of detail work we're going to do is on the shoulder pad and the helmet. So what I've done is I've taken some Gorthor Brown, I've heavily thinned this with water so it is looking a little bit more like a wash. And all I'm going to do is paint this in the recesses and down towards the bottom area of the shoulder pad and also the skull helmet, particularly around any joints that you might have. Now, I'm not worrying too much about blending this or anything. We're going to do that in the next step. All I'm concerned about here is that I get a nice Gorthor Brown colour in those deepest recesses. To start highlighting, I'm taking my smallest Artist Opus Series D dry brush and I'm going to use some Ushabti Bone. Now, I've got very little of this on my brush, but I'm going to stipple it where the light is going to be strongest. And as I'm working my way across here, what you'll start to see is where you've got that little bit of a transition line, it'll start to blend down a bit. Whilst this isn't the sexiest blending in the world, it does give the impression that that's what you've done, and it does look really effective on the model. Don't forget to do this on the helmet as well. The next highlight is with Screaming Skull, and a very similar technique to what we did last time. Again, I'm using exactly the same brush. I haven't washed it. It's completely dry, apart from the paint that was already in it. I'm focusing this more now, thinking about where the light is going to land. So I'm really focusing it on those high and raised areas. Again, on the shoulder pad and on the helmet. Where you've got some fairly angular areas, such as the skull iconography, I am going to do a bit more of a traditional dry brush just to catch those edges and start to highlight. The final stage of highlighting the helmet and that skull shoulder pad is with Wraithbone. And all I'm looking to do here is paint very thin lines across where we've got that really sharp iconography. So we're looking at things like the cheekbones around the eye sockets of the skull. We're looking at the teeth and the mouth. And this will really help accentuate those stippled blends that you've just done. Carrying on the base coating theme, we're going to do all of the red areas next. And I'm using Mephiston Red for this. Now, there's not a huge amount, but just want to make sure we've got nice, even coverage on them. So we've got that one shoulder pad. We've got the right knee pad, and we've also got the handle on the crozius as well. So just take your time with this. Make sure your paint is thin. As I was applying this, it was a little bit thick, so I did thin it down a bit more and took some more layers just to get it nice and smooth. Next, we'll paint all of the silver. Now, there's quite a substantial amount of silver on Lemartes. I'm using dark aluminium from Vallejo for this. Now, if you haven't got this, you can use lead belcher or Coat Silver from Two Thin Coats. Whatever you've got, whatever you prefer is absolutely fine. Try to be tidy with this. Now, we can go in and fix any mistakes, but generally we just want to take our time. So we've got all of the iconography on Lemartes' legs, across his chest, across his jump pack, and also on the pistol and the crozius as well. With all the elements finished and completely dry, let's give them a little bit of a shade, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Dark Tone from Army Painter. Now, I've said this in many videos, I prefer it to Null Oil because I think it's a bit more potent. It is a little bit more glossy when it dries, so you may need to consider that. If you want to use Null Oil, it's absolutely fine. You may just need to use 2 coats to get the coverage and the depth that I'm getting here. Once that's completely dry, we'll start to highlight the silver. The colour I'm using for this is Chrome from Vallejo Model Air, but you can use whatever bright silver you've got. Now, it's a good move to not have too much on your brush, and all you want to do is drag this along the edges where you can. This will give you a nice crisp, sharp highlight. Again, take your time with this. If you do make any mistakes, we can fix them later, either with black or painting some more dark aluminium over where you've probably put a highlight a bit too thick. We are also going to paint all of the studs on the armour with this, but we're not going to do it yet. We're going to finish the armour first, and we'll go back in to do all of the studs. Moving on to the gold details, we'll base all of it using Dragon's Gold from Two Thin Coats. Again, if you haven't got this, but you've got Retributor armour, that's absolutely fine. Just take your time because we're starting to get to the point where we're finishing different elements, so we don't want to spill it on bits we've already completed. So just work your way around. The main bits of gold we've got are the head of the crozius. We've also got the casing on the bolt pistol, the crozius on his chest, and some little bits of details here and there you can choose to pick out if you want. To shade all of the gold, take some Reikland Fleshshade. Now, this is a fairly easy and straightforward step. Again, focus on making sure you don't let it pull too heavily, and of course around those areas that you've already finished. Just take your time because otherwise you're going to have to go in and repair them. The first highlight that we'll do is with Glistening Gold from Two Thin Coats. A Citadel equivalent for this is something like Liberator Gold. Both colours work absolutely fine. Just make sure they're well shaken so that you've got the nice bright gold that you want. Generally, we're going to paint big areas of the model. We don't want to worry too much about edge highlighting. We just want to think where the gold is going to catch the most light and just paint those areas. The last highlight I'll do on the gold is with White Gold from Pro Acryl. Now, this is a very, very bright silvery gold colour. So if you haven't got this, maybe put a touch of chrome into the gold that you used for the first highlight. Not too much though, because it'll start to go a bit green. And generally what I'm doing with this is spot highlights and very sharp edge highlights where I think the gold is going to be the absolute brightest. Next up, we'll paint the Blood Angel symbol on Lemartes' shoulder pad. So we want to get this nice and bright. We're going to base it with Karak White. Now we're probably going to need 2 coats. All I'll say is just take your time because it's a little bit of a pain to clean it up, even though we haven't finished the red yet. But you want to make sure you just add a little bit of water to it so it flows nicely. Now I had too much on my brush to start with, so I had to clean it off. Another key point, make sure you've not got too much paint on your brush and you've got a good tip. At this point, I'm also going to paint the inside of the jetpack boosters ready for the blue glow that we'll do later on. I'm then going to shade the Blood Angel symbol using Soul Blight Grey. Now just have a little bit on your brush and let it flow into those recesses around the feathers of the wings. And it's a really nice, easy, effective way of getting a good shade on this part of the model. When that's completely dry, I'm going to take some AK white. Now again, any bright white will work here. And I'm going to start to edge highlight, generally pulling it along the sharp edges of the shape and also catching the bottom parts of those wings. Now I'm being a little bit untidy as I'm filming it, so I will go in and tidy them up later on. But this is a nice, fairly straightforward step. Just make sure, again, you've got a really good tip on your brush and not too much paint. I'm probably suffering from having too much paint on my brush, so I just need to go back and take some of that off before I apply it to the model. Whilst I've got that bright white out, I'm also going to paint the eyes on Lemartes' helmet, and I'm going to paint all of the blood drop gems that are spread across his body. Now there are quite a few, so make sure you catch all of them. I'm going to start highlighting the red on the shoulder pad next, and the first thing is to re-establish that Mephiston Red base coat. I'm just going to go back in and paint the majority of the shoulder pad, leaving those dark colours in the recesses, and of course being careful around the Blood Angel symbol. The first highlight is going to be the Evil Sun Scarlet. This is a fantastically bright red, and this is kind of the real colour that Blood Angel should be, I think. So I'm going to paint the majority of the shoulder pad with this, so it's nice and bright and really stands out on the model, but I am going to leave some of those recesses a little bit darker. The next highlight is with Wild Rider Red, and generally I'm going to make sure that there's a nice area highlight on the top of the shoulder pad, so I'm going to paint the majority of it with the Wild Rider Red, but I'm going to keep it quite thin. I can always go back over it with Evil Sun Scarlet if it's too powerful. Underneath the Blood Angel symbol, I'm going to think more about actually drawing in some lines now, just to kind of illustrate some nice crisp highlights. Finally, I'll take some Fire Dragon Bright and just paint some very, very thin lines inside the Wild Rider Red from the previous step. It's a very bright orange colour that's really going to tip the hue a little bit, so use it fairly sparingly and make sure it is very, very thin. Now, I'm not sure about the beads on Lemartes' necklace, but I am going to treat them as wood, so I'm going to paint them all with Dryad Bark to start with. This is a nice, easy step. Just be careful not to spill it. I'm then going to go in with some Gorthor Brown and just highlight the individual beads. And this is going to help them stand out on the model, but not be so overpowering that it really, really pops. Next up, we'll paint all of those blood drops. I'm using Blood Angel's Red contrast paint for this. Now, there's 2 things to be really mindful of here. Firstly, is that you haven't got too much on your brush. And secondly, that you keep it on the blood drop itself. Because if you spill it, it's going to either go onto the silver or onto the gold, and you're going to have to repaint this. Once I've got that first coat on, I'm then going to take another little bit of Blood Angel's Red contrast paint and just dot this in the bottom of the gem, just to give the impression of some depth. When that's dry, I'm going to take some of that Fire Dragon Bright and just stipple it along some of the sharper edges of those gems, just to give a hint of a highlight. It's nothing major. It's just something that the eye will see and make the assumption that it's a little bit of a shine effect. To paint Lemartes' glowing red eyes, I'm going to take some Baal Red contrast paint and paint this over the eye socket and the lens. I'm then going to clean my brush off and wipe away the centre of the eye. And this is going to give me a really faux glow effect without much effort at all. So with that done, let's get the armour highlighted. Now the first colour I'm using is Dark Reaper. Now this doesn't have fantastic coverage. I'm putting it on fairly chunky as a first highlight. Now, if you make any mistakes, you can always go back in and paint over it with the black. But generally, you want to catch all of the sharp edges and any areas that are pointing upwards and are going to catch light. So that left leg in particular has got quite a bit of elements that are going to catch the light. And of course, the jump pack will as well, so don't forget that. The next highlight is with Thunderhawk Blue. So I'm going to paint this inside the Dark Reaper from the previous stage. Now again, this isn't a paint that covers particularly well, so make sure you haven't got too much on your brush and a good point, but you may need to go over several areas over and over just to get that highlight to stand up. The key here is make sure you've got a really good point on your brush and you're dragging it along the sharp edges of the model, because that's going to help you get that crisper highlight. Just to make that armour pop a little bit, I'm going to take some Fenrisian Grey. I'm not going to go with pure Fenrisian Grey. I'm going to mix it into the Thunderhawk Blue from the previous step. Now, there's no mix ratio on this. It's just to dull the Fenrisian a little bit, so it's not so bright. And generally with this, I'm just looking for the absolute sharpest edges. So any angular corners on the armour, on the jump pack, on the bottom of the shoulder pads, and across the top of the gorget of the armour as well, just to add a little bit of interest and to make the armour pop a touch. To finish up the jet on the backpack, all I'm going to do is take a little bit of Frostheart contrast paint and paint it into those areas. Now, whilst it's still wet, I'm going to take a little bit of AK white and just dot that in the middle as well. Now, if you're happy with that, you can leave it there, or you can let it dry. You can add a little bit more Frostheart, let that dry, and then add a little bit more AK white. And that's the route I decided to go down, because when I added it onto the wet Frostheart, it didn't quite give me the glow that I wanted. The final step is to paint all of the silver studs. So I'm using chrome from Vallejo Model Air. I'm using a very small brush, and I'm just very carefully dabbing the top of the studs. And this is how I'll just work my way around and get the final touches on the model. And there we have it. Lemartes, Guardian of the Lost, is done and he is ready for the battlefield. I'm really chuffed with how this model came out, because I've used really, really simple techniques across it that hopefully anyone can replicate. I'd really like to know what you think about the new Blood Angels. Let me know down in the comments, and let me know if you want to see any more Blood Angels tutorials. I've probably got Astaroth coming at some point, so keep your eyes peeled for him. In the meantime, check out my other content that I've already done for Blood Angels. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll see you next time.